Hey everyone, tonight we're headed deep into the unknown, where stars don't shine. And legends don't need to. Picture this. I wake up face down in a smoldering wreck. My ship's console still spitting sparks behind me, and the smell of burnt circuitry mixing with something raw, wet, and definitely alive. The forest around me is too quiet. No birds, no wind, just pressure, like something is watching me, just outside the visible spectrum. You know, most people think of extraterrestrial societies as these utopian Star Trek things. But what if they weren't? What if, instead, they were old, ritualistic, brutal, and yet, strangely honorable? I didn't crash on just any planet. I landed on one they call Starn, a planet whispered about in classified military documents and lost hunter journals. If the myths were true, this was sacred ground to the Yautja. Yeah, those Yautja, predators, the ones with dreadlocks, mandibles, and zero chill. So before you feel like the mystery needs to be solved right away, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Helps me know who's out there in the dark with me. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started on tonight's mystery. At first, I assumed I'd survived the crash alone. Typical protocol: find shelter, scan for breathable air, set up a distress beacon. I did all that. The beacon, of course, was fried, but the air was breathable, the gravity tolerable, and the silence unbearable. Then I saw it, no, felt it, a shimmer between two trees, like heat distortion, but moving in the wrong direction. I squinted and caught the faintest flicker of light bending unnaturally. Predator cloaking. I knew it, and if one was watching, others were close. I wasn't alone, not by a long shot. I reached for my emergency sidearm. It was gone, taken, or had it fallen out in the crash? Either way, I was defenseless. Not that a pistol would matter against a Yautja anyway. These weren't just aliens, they were apex assassins. I backed toward the ship's husk, trying to keep all sides covered. And that's when I saw the first symbol, carved into the bark of a thick jungle tree, a Yautja glyph. A warning, a signature, maybe both. It was shaped like a crescent claw curling inward. Old pilot superstition says, when you see writing you can't read, run the other direction. I didn't. Curiosities killed more humans than war ever did. The night came fast. That's a thing on alien worlds. Daylight ends like a light switch click. I lit a chemical torch and set up camp near the wreckage. Didn't sleep, couldn't, but I did hear them. Clicking, not random noise, deliberate, calculated, like they were talking about me in code. I remembered something one of my instructors said during a survival class. Years ago, he was ex-Black Ops. Kind of a cranky survivalist. If you're being hunted, he told me, you'll know it because you won't see them. You'll feel them, like your bones are being measured for a trophy wall. At the time, I thought it was just tough guy talk. Now, I wasn't so sure. Here's an old age wisdom fact for you. Never sleep where the dead lie unless you want to meet them. I wasn't dead, yet, but my shuttle certainly was. And judging by the glyphs growing in number, I'd landed on something sacred. Or forbidden, possibly both. Then came the moment. I was refilling my water canister at a nearby stream when the air snapped, the pressure dropped, and a net made of glowing red fibers slammed around me like a bear trap. No pain, just sudden paralysis. I woke in a cave. My gear was gone. My hands were bound at the wrist with a material that looked like obsidian rope but was light as silk. The cave walls were decorated, murals etched into the stone. Scenes of battle, beasts, hunts, and always, the tall, armored figures with those sharp mandibles, looming over prey, Yautja. But here's the weird part. They didn't kill me. In fact, they didn't touch me. One entered, 7 feet tall, skin like rusted bronze, eyes like molten gold. He didn't speak, just turned, sliced his palm open, and pressed the bleeding hand to a circular mark on the wall. The symbol glowed. Then he looked at me and clicked something that felt like approval. They left me alone with a torch and a piece of roasted meat on a flat obsidian slab. My first thought was, I'm being fattened up. But then I realized something stranger. This was a rite. They were initiating me. Into what? I didn't know yet. But the meat, not bad. Kind of like crocodile jerky if it had spent 3 years aging in regret. Later, I found something buried under a loose pile of stones, a human wristwatch. Scratched but still ticking. The name engraved on the back. F. Mendoza. That name rang a bell. I'd read about him in a declassified file. A xenoarchaeologist who vanished during a deep space dig over a decade ago. No trace, no wreckage, just gone. And now, I had his watch. Quirky fact of the night. Did you know Venus rotates in the opposite direction of most planets and takes longer to rotate once than it does to orbit the Sun? Absolutely unrelated, but somehow, this planet's time felt just as backward. Back to the cave, back to the mark. That same Yautja returned, this time with what looked like a branding iron. Glowing red. My instinct said, run. But my limbs said, nah. Let's just tremble here for a bit. He pressed the symbol into my shoulder, not hard enough to burn through, but enough to leave a mark. And when it was done, he bowed. Academic debate often centers around the idea of cultural hospitality versus symbolic intimidation. This felt like both. I was now marked. For what? I didn't yet know, but I was alive, and I was part of something older than human memory. The hunt hadn't started yet, but I had the feeling it would begin with me. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it presses on your eardrums. Like you're underwater. That's what I woke up to the next morning. Not birds, not insects, just the faint tick, tick, tick of something metallic echoing through the cave. And then the hum started. I stepped out, blinking against the light-filtered fog. Outside the cave, the jungle had transformed, not literally, but perceptually. Once you realize you're being observed not by eyes but through lenses. Everything feels staged, like the world's a zoo and you're in the wrong exhibit. They were here, watching, and this time, they wanted me to know it. There were 3 of them, standing just beyond a clearing, their outlines shimmering like heat ghosts. Then one of them decloaked. Let me just say, no hologram, no movie, no photo ever gets it right. This Yautja was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more, dreadlocks that looked like coiled carbon fiber, and armor that didn't just look grown, it moved, shifted with him, like a living exoskeleton. His shoulder cannon hummed softly, scanning me, and then he made the universal follow gesture. You'd think they'd have better PR. I followed. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Why not run? First of all, there's nowhere to go. This wasn't Earth. There were no maps, no cities, no roads, just infinite jungle and the gnawing truth that I was still breathing because they allowed it. Second, I needed to understand. That's what I do. I'm a xenoanthropologist, or was. Before the crash turned me into prey with a PhD. They led me through ancient ruins overgrown with vines, stone etched with claw marks and bloodstains worn smooth by centuries. We arrived at what I can only describe as a colosseum, but inverted, buried into the jungle floor like a sinkhole temple. This was no random jungle. It was a proving ground. An arena. At the center, a towering spire rose, covered in glowing glyphs. It hummed low and deep, like it wasn't just stone, but alive. From there, hundreds of eyes peered down at me, Yautja of all shapes and sizes. Most were warriors, heavily armored, adorned with bones and pelts. But a few wore robes, stood still, their armor minimal. Priests, maybe, or historians, I wasn't sure yet. The first one who stepped toward me wore gold-trimmed plating and a mask unlike the others, longer, carved like a falcon's beak. He moved slowly, deliberately, and when he removed his mask, I didn't flinch. His mandibles twitched, his eyes narrowed, and then came the sound. Click click chur chk. Then a metallic voice translated. Flat but understandable. You are marked. You have been seen. You will witness. Now, let me hit you with a bit of old age Yautja wisdom I picked up later. Those who are spared must see. For those who see cannot forget. Creepy, sure, but surprisingly poetic for an alien species known mostly for ripping out spines. He gestured again, and two younger-looking Yautja stepped forward. They bound my wrists, gently, weirdly gently, and led me into the Colosseum's lower chambers. What I saw down there didn't feel like a prison or a lab. It felt like a church. The walls were alive with history. Literally, some kind of bioluminescent moss or tech lined the carvings, making the stories flicker like living dreams. And the carvings, not random at all, they told a story, fragmented, but coherent if you read it right. The first image showed a titanic creature, maybe 3 times the size of a Yautja, being hunted by what looked like smaller, unarmored figures, spears, traps, blood. Then came the second image, some of those hunters wearing pieces of the beast's bones. Their first armor, their first identity. The third image was more abstract, a kind of spiral caste diagram. At the center, a symbol I now bore on my shoulder. Around it spiraled 5 rings: healer, shaper, speaker, priest, and hunter. Here's your quirky fact of the night. On Earth, octopuses have 9 brains, 1 in their head and 1 for each tentacle. Makes you wonder how many brains a species like the Yautja have in their hierarchy. Back in the spiral, lines connected the roles, but never equally. Hunters were above all. They judged, they defended, they punished, and they trained the next ones. I was now in their spiral. The elder who branded me returned, this time carrying a relic, something between a dagger and a tuning fork. He placed it on a stone table in front of me, and when it hummed, a hologram burst from the wall. It showed me, walking through the jungle, eating, sleeping, drinking, even sitting alone in the wreckage. They'd been watching, recording, judging. The voice translated again. You have not fled. You have not fought. You have waited. The spiral accepts. I didn't know whether to thank them or throw up. I was brought back above ground just as the suns, there were 2, dipped below the trees. That's when things changed. The hunters now surrounded me. No longer cloaked, standing still as stone. One stepped forward, then dropped to one knee. And this next bit is something no Earth University ever trained me for. He extended his arm, and handed me a mask. Not a full one, not functional, just ceremonial, carved from obsidian and bone, etched with the same spiral that I'd seen underground. My mark was in the center. Academic debate rages over whether the Yautja see humans as prey, rivals, or potential kin. Tonight, I wasn't sure, but that mask, that was an invitation, an unspoken, "You're part of the story now." So I put it on. And for a moment, just one, I swear I heard something inside it. A voice, a memory. Maybe the mask had once belonged to someone, or something. I don't know, but when I opened my eyes again, every Yautja in that circle had vanished. Except one. The one who watched me first. From the trees. He nodded, and disappeared. The next morning, I woke up still holding the ceremonial mask. Not that I'd slept well. Have you ever tried resting after being inducted, maybe abducted, into a society that thinks trophy skulls make the best wallpaper? It messes with your REM cycle. The mask was heavier than it looked. Not physically, emotionally. It had weight, as if every person who wore it before me had left behind a piece of themselves. That's not spiritual mumbo-jumbo. I mean, it felt like I was carrying history, pressure, expectation, and maybe, just maybe, a countdown. Breakfast was offered. Again, same strange meat, same slick black fruit that smelled like overripe pears dipped in kerosene. I ate it, and survived. So, yay, the hunter with rust-colored skin, my silent escort from yesterday, returned. He pointed at the mark on my shoulder, then at the spiral carved into the dirt beneath our feet. He tapped it with his claw, then pointed at himself. And suddenly, I got it. I wasn't just here to observe. I was part of something. A process, a ritual, a trial. That's when they led me to the trial grounds. Imagine a natural canyon carved into volcanic rock. Its walls scored with ancient claw marks and splashed with stains that definitely weren't paint. There were posts, perches, viewing platforms, and cages. Lots of cages, some occupied, some not, and in the center stood a youngblood. Smaller than the rest, leaner, no trophies, no scars. His armor was standard issue, unadorned. This was his rite of passage, and I was here to witness it. Here's a piece of old Yautja wisdom I was beginning to understand. You're not a hunter until you hear your prey's last breath. That's not poetic, it's doctrine. The cage opened. Out slithered a xenomorph, not the huge ones. This was a runner, faster, more agile, with a whip-like tail that could probably cut through steel. Its inner jaw clicked open and shut as it sniffed the air. The youngblood stood frozen. Then the clicking started. Dozens of Yautja watching from the perches above. Clicking in unison, not cheering, not taunting. It was pressure, a reminder. Fight, or fall. The youngblood lunged first. Not a good move. The runner sidestepped, cracked its tail like a whip, and sent him flying into a wall. The crowd stayed silent. No sympathy. This was survival. He stood, groggy but upright, and activated his wrist blade. One of them, the other flickered and failed. And that's when I noticed the expressions from above. The older Yautja watching weren't just judging his performance, they expected failure. Like the test was never about winning. It was about who would intervene. Sure enough, someone did. A larger Yautja, maybe a mentor, maybe just a cruel observer, dropped into the pit with a thud. He moved quickly, kicked the youngblood's legs out from under him, and activated both his own blades. What happened next was hard to watch. He didn't kill the xenomorph. Not yet. He herded it, cornered it, then dragged the youngblood forward and made him finish it off. Together, blood sprayed the canyon floor, acidic, sizzling into stone. The runner screeched, then collapsed, its head bisected. The youngblood stood over it, panting, but the way his shoulders slumped, I knew the truth. He hadn't passed. The kill hadn't been earned. And the crowd, they vanished, one by one, cloaking and leaving as if he no longer existed. Academic debate often centers around the ethics of assisted rites, whether intervention corrupts the trial or reflects a communal responsibility. Among the Yautja, it's shame, plain and simple. If you don't bleed for your honor, it isn't yours. Quirky fact break, because I need it. And maybe you do too. Did you know sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins? Yeah, sometimes. Going slow is an advantage. Try telling that to the youngblood. Though, he dropped his blade, not in surrender, just in silence. I noticed he didn't cloak, didn't leave, just sat in the blood until night came. Meanwhile, my escort guided me to a chamber behind the canyon, a place I hadn't been before. Inside, murals again, but these were more modern. Holograms flickering over them, updating, shifting. It was a digital archive, and it told a different kind of story. Here, the trial was shown truthfully, not just as glorious hunts, but also failures, corruptions, times when the sacred law had been twisted to favor bloodlines, elites, politics, and suddenly, it hit me. The trials weren't fair, not always. Some were rigged. The youngblood wasn't just weak, he was set up to fail. I turned to my escort, my voice low. Why show me this? He didn't answer, just handed me something, a small skull. Tiny, not human, not xenomorph, something in between, a hybrid, not born, made. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't just a hunt. It was a breeding ground, a testing field not just for warriors, but for experiments, hybrids, new blood. The Yautja weren't preserving tradition. They were evolving it, and I was part of the control group. I spent the next night in the lower quarters of what they called the Pyramid of Ascension. The name wasn't translated for me, I just knew it. The way you know someone's staring at you through a mirror. The place wasn't built, it had grown. Stone and bone fused together in some grotesque harmony, as if the Yautja had coaxed the planet itself into giving birth to their sacred hall. It was quiet inside, dead quiet. But not peaceful, the kind of silence that only lives in places where the walls remember every scream. They brought me deeper this time. Not dragged, not chained, I walked freely, flanked by 2 guards whose armor shimmered subtly with shifting colors. Like light passing through oil. The path sloped downward. Everything sloped downward in Yautja structures. As if enlightenment was something you dug toward, not rose into. The murals down here were different. Older, less polished, some etched in blood, some scorched into the walls with plasma. This was history, but raw, untamed, sacred. We stopped at a vast hall where the ceiling curved like a ribcage overhead. In the center, a monolithic pillar of obsidian rose from the floor. It pulsed faintly, heart-like. Around it were 5 concentric rings of symbols and sculptures. Each ring represented a different caste. Finally, I was about to see how their entire society stacked up. Here's the layout, from inner to outer. First, the core ring. Only one figure stood there. Tall, unarmored, holding no weapons, just a curved staff etched with spirals. It took me a second to realize, this was not a warrior. This was a speaker, the one who decides what must be hunted. And when. Their word was law, a caste of oracles and historians, passed down through bloodlines and mentorship. No trophies, only memory. Second ring, the priest keepers. These figures wore bone masks, distinct from the usual metallic armor. Their job, not spiritual, biological. They kept the bloodlines pure, oversaw rites, controlled breeding. Yep, even Yautja have arranged marriages. If you can call a genetic pairing that ends in a dual a marriage. Third ring, the shapers. Scientists, engineers, technologists. They created the living armor, forged the cloaks, and grew the plasma casters. Weird that this caste doesn't get more attention. Without them, every glorious hunt would look like a bare-knuckle fistfight with a crab. Fourth ring, the healers. Not soft by any stretch. These beings dealt with the aftermath. Bone setting, toxin neutralizing, armor fusing. Their status was mid-tier, respected, but not revered, until one of them saved a speaker. That is, there's a whole side mural about that, complete with stylized acid burns and dramatic poses. Fifth ring, the hunters. You'd think they'd be in the center. Right, nope, they circle everything. The outermost ring, the visible face of Yautja society. Warriors, assassins, enforcers, but ultimately, expendable. Their honor lies not in survival, but in how many scars they collect before they die. Old age wisdom alert, the center does not roar. It listens. I think it was a Yautja proverb, or maybe something my grandma said when I was 5. Either way, it applies here. My escort stopped me in front of a mirror. Not a human mirror, a black slab that shimmered only when touched. When I stepped close, the reflection that stared back wasn't mine. It was me, but with armor, with mandibles, a distorted Yautja human hybrid. Face contorted but familiar. The reflection tilted its head. I didn't. Chills. People, real ones. Suddenly, the slab shifted, became a portal, not literal, more like a viewing screen. It played a scene, a young Yautja being raised within the speaker caste. Taught to listen to wind, to read blood like scripture. Then it cut to another, a healer forging a new kind of cauterizing blade. Then another, a shaper welding cloaking tech into living armor. This wasn't just law, it was indoctrination. The voice returned, humming from unseen speakers. Every caste knows its place. Only imbalance brings ruin. And right on cue, a door opened behind the obsidian pillar. The air changed, denser, colder. The room beyond, a chamber with 5 chairs. One for each caste, but only 4 were occupied. The 5th, empty, and I was guided toward it. Academic debate often argues whether the Yautja caste system is rigidly deterministic or if upward mobility is possible through trial. Sitting in that chair, I suddenly understood. Neither was true. The structure was maintained by illusion. Everyone believed the system worked. So it did. But now, there was a vacancy, not just in seating, in balance. And for some reason, they thought I could fill it. Here's your quirky, wildly off-topic fact of the section: male seahorses carry the babies. Whole pregnancies, pouches and all. Meanwhile, I was possibly being drafted into an alien theocracy. Life's funny like that. My hand reached for the armrest. As soon as I touched it, the room dimmed, and a beam scanned across my body. Not painful, not even warm, just clinical, measuring me, judging me. Then the voice again. You are neither hunter nor prey. You are Echo. I didn't know what that meant. But when I stood, the other figures did too. And they bowed, which, frankly, felt way more unsettling than being hunted. So, being bowed to by 4 Yautja caste leaders wasn't the honor it might sound like. It was terrifying. They didn't nod like humans do. They lowered their heads slowly, mandibles twitching slightly, like they were smelling my soul for weaknesses. Then, just as abruptly, they turned and left the chamber, each walking through a separate corridor. One for each ring of caste. I was left alone. And then, of course, the floor moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just shifted. The seat I'd stood beside slid downward on a stone platform, revealing a spiraling staircase beneath it, lit by glowing red spores. It looked like something out of a Dungeons and Dragons fever dream. Naturally, I went down, because that's what we do, right? Curiosity beats self-preservation 9 out of 10 times. The stairs spiraled deep, and the air got heavier with each step. Not suffocating, just thick, scented, like copper, ozone, and, oddly, cinnamon, I swear. And at the bottom, I found something I hadn't expected to see. Children, not fully grown warriors, not even teens. Actual Yautja kids, barely 4 feet tall, if that, with oversized masks and gangly limbs. They were sparring, climbing, practicing basic stealth drills. A few looked over when I entered, then quickly turned away. Not fear, not disgust, just indifference. But someone else was watching. A figure emerged from the shadows, different from all the others. Tall, imposing, but wearing no armor at all. Just a dark robe, almost ceremonial. Her dreadlocks were longer, thinner, adorned with small bone rings. Her face was scarred, but not from battle. Ritual scarring. 3 long slashes ran diagonally across her upper mandible. She didn't speak, didn't need to. I knew who she was. The matriarch. I'd heard rumors of them. Most depictions of Yautja culture are patriarchal, big dudes with big weapons doing big ego things. But those in the know, the deep files, the secret reports, mention a shadow caste. Rare, revered, and feared. The matriarchs are said to be the true keepers of the species' survival. Not by force, but by control, breeding, balance, genetics, long-term vision. And this one, she stared right into me. You ever have someone look at you like they already know how your story ends? Yeah, that. She gestured, and one of the children scampered forward, fast, nimble, holding something in a bundle of tanned hide. He handed it to me without a word. Inside, a scroll, an actual scroll, made of some flexible metallic fiber that shimmered like wet ink. It unrolled itself the moment I touched it. The symbols danced across the surface, rearranging themselves into words I could somehow understand. Translation tech, psychic interface, who knows? The scroll told a story, not of glory, but of fracture. There was once a time, long ago, when the Yautja nearly wiped themselves out. Not through war, through imbalance. Too many hunters, not enough healers. Too much ambition, not enough wisdom. They became what they hunted, ravenous, unchecked, unsustainable. And it was the matriarchs who stepped in. They culled, they reorganized, they redesigned society itself, using genetic manipulation, selective pairing, and strategic silence. They created the castes, the order, the illusion of hierarchy, when in fact it was all one system, delicately balanced by invisible hands. Old age Yautja saying, the knife that cuts too often must be sheathed, or it dulls. I'm guessing the matriarchs took that very seriously. The scroll also showed something else. A warning. Another imbalance was forming. And humans, we were the tipping point. Our interference, our adaptation, our unpredictability. We weren't just prey anymore. We were variables, errors in the algorithm of Yautja dominance. Some saw that as opportunity. Others, a threat. The matriarch raised a hand. A platform rose from the floor. On it, a stasis pod, transparent, and inside, suspended in some sort of blue gel, was a creature I couldn't fully comprehend. Part Yautja, part human, and something else. Eyes like a xenomorph, but no tail. Broader shoulders, skin like synthetic hide. It wasn't alive. Yet. Quirky fact time. Because I need one to keep breathing here. Some species of jellyfish can literally reverse their aging process and start over as a polyp. A mortal jellyfish. If only I could hit reset right now. I turned back to the matriarch. She was still silent, but the message was loud and clear. They weren't just hunting, they were designing, trialing, adapting, and I was now entangled in a breeding program. A memory archive. A ritualistic chessboard spanning generations. Not because I was special, but because I was there. Because I saw. Academic minds might call this a closed-loop sociogenetic schema. I call it a really bad time to be a crash survivor. The matriarch stepped forward, placed one finger, clawed, elegant, on my forehead, and whispered the first Yautja word I ever truly understood. Observe. Then everything went dark. No, not like unconscious. The lights just shut off. Silence again. Cold silence. And when they came back on, the matriarch was gone. The children were gone. The scroll turned to ash in my hands. But the pod was still there. Still humming. Still waiting. And in its faint reflection, I saw myself again. This time, I didn't look quite human. When the lights came back up, I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the traditional sense. There were no Yautja in the chamber with me. But the pod, still glowing, still whispering with whatever quiet song keeps a half-born hybrid asleep. And the shadows on the far wall, they moved. Slowly, just enough to make you question whether your eyes are betraying you. That's the kind of place the Yautja built, where stillness is rarely still. And silence is rarely safe. I left the chamber without being told to. There was no escort this time. No doors slamming behind me. No traps. Just corridors that opened, one after the other, as if something, or someone, already knew which way I'd choose. I ended up back in the arena. But it wasn't empty. This time, it was a courtroom. Now, before you imagine anything resembling human justice, let me stop you. This wasn't mahogany benches and powdered wigs. It was a circle of standing stones carved with skulls. One stone stood higher than the others, blackened by heat and age. Atop it stood a Yautja, armor stripped away, scarred, one mandible broken and twitching, eyes fixed forward. This, I would learn, was a dishonored hunter. The trial was already underway, and I was the guest of honor, or witness, or sacrifice. I wasn't sure anymore. The Yautja surrounding the circle wore full battle armor, helms on, shoulder cannons primed, not just for show. These weren't guards, they were executioners. Every one of them had the authority to end the accused's life right there if a single rule was broken. The elder, remember the one with the falcon mask from earlier, spoke again. His voice, through that eerie translator, was colder than before. He broke the spiral, took prey not permitted, killed kin, desecrated hunt law. The dishonored hunter didn't speak. He just stood there, tall, defiant. His wounds were self-inflicted. Ritual cuts, across the chest and thighs. I'd seen something like that in human history books, samurai seppuku. Kind of. But this was a protest. He didn't want to die quietly. He wanted to make them uncomfortable. And he was succeeding. The falcon mask turned to me. You will witness judgment. You carry no mark of caste. You see what others must not. And then came the twist. They handed me a blade. It wasn't ceremonial. It was alive, vibrated faintly in my hand, like it knew what it was for. The elder continued. Your role is not choice. It is function. Observe. Mark. Cut. Wait. What? They wanted me to kill him? No. They wanted me to brand him. If I did, he'd live in exile, branded, shamed, hunted by his own kind. If I refused, he'd be executed immediately. Old Yautja proverb. Mercy is the slowest death. I stepped forward, blade humming in my palm. The dishonored hunter didn't flinch. He stared at me, head tilted, as if he was the one judging me. What do you do when two fates are handed to you, and both reek of injustice? I branded him, just once, across the left mandible, a single glowing line. He fell to one knee, not in submission, but in recognition. And then, he vanished. No smoke, no transport, just gone. They had cloaked him, removed him from sight, from life. Academic theorists have long debated the Yautja concept of honor, whether it's a moral code or simply an elaborate survival tactic. After that moment, I stopped trying to categorize it. Yautja honor is like a shark's swim. If it stops moving, it dies. The crowd disbanded, leaving behind only the elder and me. He walked me to a wall I hadn't seen before, pressed a panel, and it opened, not into another hallway, but into a chamber of records. Dozens, hundreds, of skulls, suspended in transparent canisters, labeled, dated, not just trophies, profiles. And not all of them were alien. There were human skulls, too, some recent, some very recent. One had a name etched on the display. D. Monroe, Earth Sector 8. I knew that name, an exobiologist, declared dead 5 years ago on a classified expedition. The official story, ship malfunction, but here he was, or at least, his head, and beside it, a note, in Yautja glyphs. The translation pinged in my brain. He lied to the spiral, taught prey to kill hunters. Apparently, Monroe had given a human colony predator tech, tried to level the playing field. Instead, he broke the rules, broke the game. Now he was a warning. Quirky fact for your sanity: bananas are technically berries, and strawberries aren't. Go figure. The elder led me to the last row, the farthest wall, and there, just beneath the glowing glyph of a twisted spiral, was a new canister. Empty, labeled, unknown, function, echo. It was for me, not if I failed, not if I disobeyed, just, eventually, because the spiral must be recorded, the system must be preserved. And once you observe enough, you stop being the observer, and start being the artifact. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, I just wouldn't. The longer I stayed awake, the more time I had to process what I'd seen. A skull reserved for me. A courtroom built from bone. A society so obsessed with order that even exile came with a dress code. But the next day, they didn't give me time to dwell. I was summoned at dawn, at least. I think it was dawn. The planet's sky shifts like oil on water, and time here feels more like a mood than a measurement. This time, the arena wasn't an execution chamber. It was a stage. Hundreds of Yautja surrounded it again, perched in silence, cloaked and uncloaked, all eyes forward, and at the center, two young bloods. Each bore a different clan mark, etched freshly into their armor. This wasn't some friendly sparring match. This was a duel, and it was no simulation. One of them would bleed. A priest keeper stood to the side, holding a long rod with a pulsing orb at the tip. He lowered it to the arena floor, and suddenly, the walls around the fighters shimmered. A barrier activated, energy crackled faintly in the air, sealing him inside. The fight began with no countdown, just instinct. One lunged, wrist blades extended. The other sidestepped and countered with a brutal backhand, cracking the opponent's mask and exposing the side of his face. Mandibles flared, blood splattered the floor, neon green and steaming. Here's a Yautja adage I learned from a half-translated glyph: the first blood is never the last. In this case, that was painfully accurate. The fight escalated fast. These weren't young bloods. These were assassins in training. One tried to feint a leap, only to get caught mid-air and slammed to the ground. The crowd clicked louder now, not cheering, judging, and all the while, the priest stood still, watching, not the fight, but me. Why? Because this duel wasn't about victory. It was about rules, about ritual, and someone needed to see how deep the cracks in that ritual ran. That someone, unfortunately, was me. Suddenly, one of the fighters shouted, not in anger, but desperation. The other had pinned him, blade at the throat, but instead of delivering a clean kill, he hesitated. He looked up, toward the elder watching from above. Then, he spoke, and not in the Yautja tongue. In English. Do it, he growled. Finish it, or you're nothing. I froze. A Yautja, speaking my language. What was this? He repeated it again, louder this time, as if daring the crowd to understand. The blade trembled at his opponent's throat. Seconds passed. The arena crackled with silence. And then, he stood up, refused to kill. The crowd erupted into chaos, cloaks flaring, clicks rising like a swarm of insects. The barrier dropped instantly. 2 elders dropped into the ring. The defiant Yautja knelt, willingly, and placed his weapon on the ground. He'd forfeited, not just the match, his right, and the one who'd lost. He looked up, confused, then relieved, then ashamed. Because everyone knew, mercy was not honor. Mercy was blame. Academic discourse has long wrangled over whether mercy in warrior cultures is strength or weakness. In Yautja law, it's treason wrapped in compassion. They didn't punish either of them that day. Instead, they punished the priest. He was led away in silence, his rod shattered before the crowd. I didn't find out why until later. He was the one who arranged the match. And he knew the loser was bloodbound to the other fighter. Quirky fact. Crows remember faces and can hold grudges for years. Just like these guys, apparently. The elder finally approached me after the crowd dispersed. He placed something in my hand. A flat chip, smooth and warm like a living seed. It bloomed, not literally, but it activated a memory. Not a hologram this time. A projection into my mind. A hunt. I saw through the eyes of a Yautja, moving through trees, tracking prey. The prey, a human colony, desert planet, dust storms, weak defenses. But the Yautja wasn't alone. He was with a human. Working together, strategic, efficient, lethal. They hunted not for each other, but with each other. And then, the betrayal. The human killed the Yautja, shot him in the back, stole his gear, used it to elevate himself into legend. That human was Monroe, the skull I saw earlier. That memory chip, it was proof. The spiral had never forgotten. And it never forgives. The elder's voice echoed again. Ritual is not law, it is warning. And I think I finally understood. The rituals, the duels, the trials, they weren't just for glory. They were reminders. Do not forget what happened when honor slipped. Do not forget what humans taught them. Do not forget the risk of mercy. Old Yautja proverb, mercy breeds chaos. Chaos feeds prey. I left the arena that night under a different sky. One of the twin moons had vanished behind a cloud bank. The other glowed blood orange, casting jagged shadows across the ruins. I knew then that I wasn't watching anymore. I was being tested, not on strength, but on belief. Did I still think I could study this culture, analyze it, publish a paper? Because the only thing I'd be publishing now was my last breath. By now, I knew better than to expect rest. The Yautja didn't operate on Earth logic. Day and night weren't for sleeping or waking. They were just cycles, and each cycle brought a new trial. Not always of blood, sometimes of understanding, of perception, or in this case, dinner. Yeah, that's where this chapter of madness begins. They brought me to what I can only describe as a feasting chamber. You might imagine a grand hall, like some Viking longhouse filled with clashing mugs and war stories. Nah, this was clinical, silent, ritualistic. The space was circular, with 5 curved tables, each representing a caste. Yes, again with the castes. These folks organize their lives like color-coded file folders. And heaven help you if you sit in the wrong section. I was seated at the outermost ring, the observer's circle. Not shamed, not exalted, just watched. And then they brought out the food. First, the meat. Always the meat. Thick cuts of some animal I didn't recognize. Think giant reptilian boar, but somehow wetter. Roasted over flame that hissed blue instead of orange. The smell, surprisingly pleasant, smoky, with a tang of metal. Then came the second course. Fermented plant matter wrapped in the dried skins of what looked like oversized worms. The texture, well, if depression were a food group, that's what it felt like chewing. But here's where things got wild. The order in which each caste ate. The shapers, those techie artisans, ate first. Not the hunters, not the speakers. The ones who created tools and armor got first bite. It was a quiet display of status, without creation. Nothing else mattered. Second came the healers, then the priest keepers, then the speakers. Last, the hunters. Old age Yautja wisdom, tools feed the kill. Flesh does not. Basically, being good at stabbing things gets you a seat at the table, but not the first plate. And here I was thinking these guys were all brute force and plasma cannons. Turns out, their dinner etiquette could humble a royal banquet. There's a whole theory in anthropology about diet-based hierarchy, the idea that what you eat, and when, reflects your societal value. With the Yautja, it's literal. Every dish was specific to caste. Healers were served portions laced with bioluminescent fungus, used to boost immune systems and enhance blood filtration. They needed clarity of hand. After all, shapers had fatty cuts soaked in mineral oils, meant to strengthen nerve response and extend wake cycles. The hunters, they ate lean meat coated in acidic herbs that helped scar tissue harden faster. Apparently, pain isn't a downside, it's a performance enhancer. Quirky fact for this section, in ancient Rome, flamingo tongues were a delicacy. Wild, right? Compared to that, this dinner actually felt reasonable. One dish caught my eye, bright blue, jiggly, vaguely cube-shaped. It glowed faintly and emitted a low hum. A shaper dropped one on my plate, then tapped the table twice, a gesture. I assume that meant, eat that and try not to hallucinate. So of course, I did. It tasted like battery acid and disappointment. But then, something happened. Not visual hallucinations, sensory shifts. I could hear the temperature in the room. I could feel the silence, not as emptiness, but as texture. Everything vibrated slightly out of sync, like I was being tuned into a new frequency. And the Yautja around me, they looked different. Their movements were slower, more deliberate. Their language, those clicks and growls, sounded almost decipherable. I heard phrases like, cycle turns, the echo dines, let the spiral breathe. And somewhere, I realized, the food wasn't just sustenance. It was communion, ritual consumption. Think of it like the reverse of poison, the idea that certain substances unlock higher awareness or connection with ancestral memory. Academic discussions call this ingestive ancestralism. Basically, eat what your ancestors ate to become them. In Yautja society, certain meals were believed to pass down memory, not just genetically, but spiritually, and that made sense of what happened next. A hunter approached me, holding a carved drinking horn filled with something thick and black. He pressed it into my hands and waited. No words, just expectation. So I drank. It was bitter, warm, and almost certainly alive. Then came the visions. Not dreamlike, not metaphorical, real. I saw through the eyes of a huntmaster, centuries ago, chasing prey across a molten plain. I felt the adrenaline, the calculation. Every decision mattered, every breath. Then the scene shifted. A betrayal. One of his own turned on him mid-hunt, to claim a greater trophy. It ended in fire, and as I came back to myself, blinking, gasping, sweat slicking my back, I understood. This feast wasn't just about caste. It was a test of memory. Yautja don't just live their culture, they absorb it, generation by generation, through food, through scars, through shared blood, and by eating with them, I'd taken in more than nutrients. I'd swallowed their truth, and I think that's when they started to believe I might actually belong. Or at least, be worthy of the final test. By the time they took me to the armory, I wasn't surprised, not by the floating door made of liquid metal, not by the way it whispered open like it knew I was coming. Not even by the fact that 2 fully armored hunters flanked me the entire time. Silent as shadows and twice as menacing. No, what surprised me was what they let me see. The Yautja armory isn't a weapons rack. It's a cathedral, built into the rock face of a dead mountain. The chamber was cavernous, glowing with bioluminescent lines that traced circuits across every surface, like the place itself had veins. The weapons weren't stored, they were cradled, held aloft in glass-like cocoons, suspended in low gravity, humming faintly like they were dreaming of combat. Here's a phrase that stuck with me from a faded glyph near the entrance. Only those who bleed may touch. And trust me, I was still sore from that ceremonial brand. Each display floated a foot off the ground, rotating slowly. Plasma casters, wrist blades, cloaking rigs. But what caught my eye weren't the weapons themselves. It was the material. These weren't metal. They were grown, living alloys, biomechanical hybrids that responded to muscle current and intent. Not AI exactly, more like trained instincts in metal form. One blade snapped upright as I approached it, not threatening, just curious. I swear it leaned toward me like a dog sniffing a stranger. Then I was shown something else. A mask, not ceremonial like the one they gave me earlier. This one was sleek, dark, and covered in glowing veins, like a topographic map of a dying star. When I placed it over my face, everything changed. My vision blurred, then focused, and I saw everything. Heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, heartbeats, even through walls. I staggered back. The mask adjusted automatically, calming the input. It had scanned me in an instant and recalibrated to my physiology. Old Yautja proverb, the eye that sees too much must be trained to blink. Sage advice. Honestly, I nearly blacked out from overstimulation. But the mask, it liked me. It stayed powered, unlike the others I tried in secret before. This one bonded, and that meant something. One of the hunters approached, probably sensing my awe. He activated a hologram between us. It showed a younger Yautja, unarmored, kneeling before an elder. The elder handed him a similar mask. Then, with slow reverence, carved a mark into the younger's chest. Not deep, just enough to scar. The hunter pointed at my chest. And then his own. Same place, same mark. The implication was clear. I hadn't been given a tool. I'd been accepted by one. There's a whole field of academic debate around the concept of biotechnological imprinting, where tools adapt to users based on compatibility rather than coding. This was like that, except it was also sacred. You don't program Yautja gear. You earn it. I kept exploring. One wall was locked, sealed behind a gate that pulsed red with what looked like DNA strands. The hunter didn't let me near it. Just one word came through the translator. Dishonored. That's where they stored forbidden gear. Weapons too cruel, too unpredictable, too dishonorable to use. Ones used by traitors, outcasts, rogues who violated the spiral. I caught a glimpse through the translucent gate. A long spear, twisted, almost serpentine, dripping something black that didn't obey gravity. And beside it, a mask with no eye slits. Just a blank void. Quirky fact for balance, the ancient Egyptians used live crocodiles in their temples. Worshipped them, fed them, named them. Just another reminder that danger and divinity have always shared a bedroom. Back to the main chamber. I was invited, no, instructed, to choose one piece. Not for collection, for participation. The hunt was coming, and only those who entered armed could return with honor, or at all. I selected a single item. Not the blade that shimmered with static. Not the gun that pulsed with hunger. I chose the mask. Because in this world, vision is power, and ignorance is prey. As I turned to leave, the walls around me shimmered, images blooming briefly across the surface. Scenes of past hunts, victories, defeats, and one image that stopped me cold. A human, clad in full Yautja armor. Scarred, fierce, respected, not prey, not visitor, a hunter. Below the image, a phrase glowed in gold. One who earned the blood. And next to it, a mirror. But in the reflection, I wasn't wearing my face anymore. The mask had become me. I don't remember walking back to my quarters. I remember the weight of the mask. Not on my face, but in my mind. Like it had rewired something behind my eyes. Every shadow now felt legible. Every flicker of movement had meaning. I wasn't just seeing, I was reading the environment. That's when I realized, the mask wasn't just showing me the world. It was training me. When I closed my eyes, it didn't shut off. It played back images I hadn't seen consciously. Tiny shifts in muscle tone. Micro sounds. The scent trails of something I hadn't even noticed in the jungle. The Yautja don't hunt with brute force. They compile. They calculate. The kills may be primal, but the process is pure data. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. Not in a physical sense. More like tension had a smell. Somewhere between ionized metal and moss after lightning. I stepped outside and found myself escorted again. This time by 5 hunters. 5. That was the signal. I was being brought to her. The matriarch. We took a path I hadn't seen before. Along a sheer ridge of volcanic stone. Lit only by the distant hum of magma far beneath the surface. The wind up here didn't howl, it vibrated. Like the planet itself was whispering secrets it didn't want repeated. At the end of the ridge stood a spire. Black, organic. It pulsed with dim blue veins. As if it had a pulse. Or was dreaming. Inside, it was utterly silent. And there she was. Larger than before. Somehow. Not in stature, but presence. The matriarch's dreadlocks shimmered with tiny metal bands, each one carved with a different symbol. Her robe dragged like water, though the floor was dry. This wasn't a throne room. It was a womb of power. She gestured. I knelt, instinctively, not because I'd been told to, because something older than language demanded it. Old Yautja wisdom. You kneel only to stand higher than before. She stepped forward, reaching into a bone satchel at her hip. Pulled out something. A skull. Small, human, but modified. The cranium had been fused with alien bone. Xenomorph, possibly, etched with glyphs, sealed with resin, and hollowed. A ritual object. She held it to my chest. And I heard her voice again. Not through translator, not through air. Straight into my mind. You carry the echo, but echoes fade unless given form. Then she placed the skull in my hands. It was warm, like it had just stopped living. She stepped back, allowing me space, and a translucent screen dropped from the ceiling. It showed a map, not of this planet, of Earth. Specifically, its cities. Then the image shifted. Dotted points of known hunts. For centuries, all of them disguised as accidents, disappearances, or natural disasters. London, 1888. Jack the Ripper. Yeah, not human. Tunguska, 1908. Cover for a failed predator hunt. Los Angeles, 1997. A test of urban tracking. One they failed. Academic scholars often claim we exaggerate patterns to find meaning. But when the pattern stares you in the face, connected by blood and claw, it's not paranoia, it's legacy. And Earth wasn't just a playground, it was a breeding ground. Then came the final image. A face. Mine. Flickering. Then stabilizing. Designated Echo 3. There were 2 before me. Both dead. One tried to weaponize the Yautja's hunting tech for human use. The other went native, and turned against them. Both were erased. And now me, inheritor of their failures. Quirky fact. Just to breathe, the blue whale's heart is so big, a human could swim through its arteries. That's how I felt standing there, inside the lifeblood of a species that didn't need me, but had chosen to let me live. The matriarch stepped forward again and placed one final object in my hands. A seed. Black, iridescent, pulsing faintly. "Plant this at the end of your trial," she said in my mind. "If you return." Not when. If. I'd been marked, masked, armed. Now, I was being tasked. The seed, I later learned, would grow into a memory vault, if watered with the blood of a successful kill. If not, it would wither, and so would my name in their records. We left the spire in silence. The 5 hunters flanking me again. This time, they weren't guards. They were witnesses. By dawn, I'd be part of the final ceremony, the blood and stardust ritual. And if I survived, I'd no longer be Echo. I'd be something else entirely. Dawn didn't rise that morning, it uncoiled. The jungle fog peeled away in long tendrils, revealing a sky so sharp it looked carved from glass. The moons were gone, tucked beneath the horizon, leaving only stars that blinked with judgment. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a reckoning. I stood at the edge of the ritual ground, an ancient crater overgrown with razor-thorned vines and bone totems. The hunters, 25 of them, formed a wide circle, each standing perfectly still, cloaked in full armor. Their eyes glowed faintly, like coals smothered in ash. Somewhere beyond them, the jungle watched, and in the center, a dais, raised, bare, waiting. They brought in the accused. He was taller than any I'd seen before, massive, cloaked in blood and shame. A dishonored hunter, the same one from the trial. Maybe, or another like him. It didn't matter. He had broken the spiral, killed outside the pact, hunted a shaper. Of all things, he was the worst kind of traitor in Yautja society. Not a failure, but a predator who no longer followed the code. He wasn't here to be judged. He was here to be offered. And guess who got to play executioner? That's right, me. Here's where it gets complicated. See, normally, a ritual kill in Yautja culture isn't about punishment. It's about restoring balance. The dishonored must be erased from memory, not just their body, but their place in the spiral. For that, it must be done in full ceremony, under watch, and by someone unmarked by vengeance. And who better than the Echo? Old Yautja phrase, the unblooded may cleanse what the blooded cannot. The matriarch watched from above, standing beneath a stone arch etched with the oldest glyphs. She didn't speak, she stared. The seed she'd given me pulsed in my hand, now affixed to my wrist armor. It had grown warm. A countdown. One of the hunters handed me the blade. Short, serrated, weighted at the hilt. Not a practical weapon, a ritual one. The dishonored hunter was released into the arena. No armor, no mask, just skin, scarred and thick like tree bark. He locked eyes with me and smiled. A horrible, knowing twist of mandibles that said, "Let's see if you can follow through." And then, he charged. No waiting, no words, just movement. I dodged, barely. His claw slashed air inches from my throat. I rolled and came up facing him again. The blade in my hand buzzed faintly, responding to my pulse. My breath, my fear. He struck again. I blocked. The blade caught his forearm, slicing shallow. Blood sizzled across the dirt. And a gasp. No. A click rippled through the crowd. The fight was underway. Here's where things slowed down. Not in real time, but in my perception. The mask I'd bonded with didn't just show thermal imaging anymore. It predicted, anticipated movements, calculated trajectory, like it wanted me to succeed. I struck back, quick, under the ribs. He grunted, more impressed than hurt. Swung low. I leapt, came down on his back and drove the blade into the thick muscle between his shoulder blades. He roared, threw me off like a child's toy. The crowd didn't move. This wasn't for them. It was for the spiral. He lunged again, this time, faster, wild. He got sloppy. That was his mistake. I ducked, rolled behind, and, with both hands, drove the blade into the base of his skull. He fell, hard. Silence followed. Even the jungle held its breath. Then, without command, the hunters approached. Each placed a clawed hand over their heart and bowed slightly. Not to me, to the spiral, which had just been reset. The matriarch raised her hand, and the sky shivered. A column of starlight erupted from the dais, illuminating the Dishonoured's body as it was vaporized, erased completely. No blood, no remains, just a gust of warm wind and the scent of burnt ozone. And then, it was my turn. I stepped forward, removed the seed from my armor, planted it at the very center of the platform. It sank instantly into the soil, and bloomed, not into a plant, but a stone, black, iridescent, engraved with my glyph, the echo spiral. It glowed once, then solidified. I had passed, and I had become. The final stage wasn't applause or recognition. It was solitude. The hunters dispersed. The matriarch turned and walked into the shadows, and I stood alone on the platform, staring at the stone I'd just planted. A mark, a memory, a warning. Academic debate would later argue whether this act was cultural assimilation or ritual exploitation. But for me, it was evolution. Quirky fact: there's a type of fungus that infects ants and controls their behavior, leading them to their death so the fungus can reproduce. Sometimes, the host doesn't realize they're part of a larger process, until it's far too late. They say if you stare long enough into the abyss, it starts to recognize you. Smile. Even after the ritual, I wasn't escorted back. No guards, no hunters, not even a whisper of footsteps behind me. It was the first time since the crash I'd walked alone, truly alone. But I wasn't unaccompanied, because the spiral was with me now. I felt it, not just a symbol on my shoulder, or a scar in my skin, but inside. My instincts had changed. I moved quieter, I breathed slower. I could tell, just from the sway of a single jungle fern, how many creatures were hiding behind it. I wasn't one of them anymore. I was something else. And then, they showed me the skull. Not just any skull, a human skull, polished, preserved, placed on a pedestal like a relic. Its jaw wired with gold thread, the cranium lined with ceremonial glyphs. But the shape, unmistakable. I stepped closer, and there, etched beneath the orbital bone, was a name. Rios. I knew it. Dr. Antonio Rios, xenoanthropologist, explorer, a real-life Indiana Jones who vanished during a jungle expedition in Peru 20 years ago. The official story, lost in a rockslide. But here, he was legend. A hunter stepped forward, tall and painted in streaks of ash gray. He carried a second skull, also human, but smaller, less worn. He placed it next to Rios's. And that's when the room shifted. A projection shimmered from the wall. Not video, memory. A scene unfolded before me. Drive. Rios, younger, scrappier, speaking to a Yautja in an overgrown temple. Not fighting, not running, learning. The hunter handed him a blade. Rios accepted it. Then the screen changed again. Rios in combat. Not against Yautja, but with them, fighting xenomorphs, leading a small squad of what appeared to be hybrids. Lightly armored, half-bloods. The spiral had made room for him. Until it hadn't. The memory ended with a final image. Rios. Surrounded, bleeding, laughing, and finally, bowing his head as a masked Yautja removed it cleanly with one strike. Old Yautja proverb. The greatest honor is to die as one of us. So yes, drive. Rios had become one of them. But only after the spiral judged he could go no further. The hunter beside me finally spoke, voice thick through the translator. He did not betray. He did not lead. He became. And then, the hunter turned to me. What will you become? It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Here's the twist most people wouldn't expect. The Yautja don't hate humanity. They respect potential. They envy adaptability. But they also fear what it might bring if left unchecked. Because we don't follow the spiral. We follow ambition. And ambition, in their world, is corruption with armor. Quirky fact of the night. When a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, its body literally digests itself in the chrysalis, turns to soup before reforming. Transformation doesn't come clean. It comes through obliteration. The wall shifted again. Another face appeared. Mine. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a choice. Next to my image were 2 words in glowing glyphs. Echo ascends. Echo observes. One meant I'd join the ranks, take on full armor, full status, begin the path of hunterhood. The other, remain the observer, the outsider, the one who watched but never acted. Academic circles would dream of this moment, frame it as a symbolic tension between immersion and distance, ethical detachment versus experiential knowledge. Me, I saw it for what it really was. A coin flip with consequences written in blood. I stepped forward. I pressed my hand against the option I feared most. Echo ascends. And the room sealed. A hiss, a shudder. The air grew thick. From the walls emerged a new figure, fully armored, masked, slow in step but infinite in presence. He removed his helmet. He was human, aged, scarred, but unmistakably human. He didn't smile. He just looked at me and said, "Then you need to know what happens next." And just like that, the room went dark. Darkness has a shape. I didn't know that until I stood inside it. Not just absence of light, but a presence. The kind that breathes with you, listens when you don't speak, and answers when you haven't asked anything out loud. The human, yes, the other human, stood in the center of the void. His armor was old, scuffed, not patched, preserved in its damage. Every burn mark, every acid stain told a story, and I was about to hear one. "Name's Kylo," he said, removing his helmet completely. "Used to be Echo 1. That hit me like a sonic boom through a dream. Echo 1, the first human inducted into the spiral." He pointed to a floating hologlyph beside him. It flickered to life, displaying 3 images, Rios, Monroe, and Kylo. "They thought I died," he said, voice dry as dust. "Technically, I did, but the spiral gave me a choice." Old Yautja wisdom I'd never heard before. Maybe because it was only whispered among those like him. Die as prey, live as memory, or rise as myth. Kylo turned toward me fully now, his eyes sunken but sharp. "Everyone wants to become a hunter," he said. "No one asks what happens after." He raised his arm and tapped a hidden panel on his gauntlet. The darkness peeled back, and suddenly we were standing in a massive, open chamber deep beneath the jungle. You ever have vertigo while standing still? That was this place. No walls, just distance. And in that void, trophies. Hundreds of them. Xenomorph skulls, human skulls, something else, creatures I didn't recognize. Some were enormous. Some were disturbingly child-sized. All polished, all honored. "These are the ones who mattered," Kylo said. "Not because they died, but because they changed something." He gestured again, and a new image bloomed mid-air. A planet, Earth, covered in red spiral indicators. The Yautja weren't just hunting anymore. They were mapping behaviors. They were building a psychological profile of humanity through trial and blood. Each hunt wasn't just for trophies. It was a test. And now, we were failing. "You know why they brought you here?" Kylo asked, stepping closer. "Because they need someone who can see the end coming." He pointed at my chest. "They think you're it." I looked down. The spiral symbol on my armor had changed. No longer a simple curl, but fractured into 3 lines. One straight, one looping, one broken. "The 3 paths," he explained. "They give it to those who stand at the threshold. The first path, hunter. You become part of the bloodline. Inducted, armored, bound to the spiral and subject to its laws. The second, heretic. You take what you've learned, escape, and warn humanity, but you become hunted forever. The third, the one no one talks about, keeper. You stay, not as a warrior, not as a scholar, but as a living archive. You watch everything," he said, "record it, interpret it, pass it on, but never interfere." And that's when I noticed it. Kylo's eyes didn't blink, not once during our talk. Because he wasn't fully human anymore. He had become something between memory and machine. A walking spiral. Academic thinkers might call this post-humanism or trans-species existentialism. I call it loneliness in armor. Quirky fact to digest all this: the Greenland shark can live over 400 years. Slow, cold, blind, And still hunting. Some things were built to endure the long story. Kylo gave me one last thing, a data chip. Small and sharp-edged, like a razor tooth. Plant this when your story ends. He said, wherever you fall, it'll find the next one. I slipped it into my gauntlet. Then he stepped back into the dark. And vanished. I don't mean he cloaked. I mean he ceased to exist. No sound, no trace, just a soft pulse through the floor. A recognition. The spiral had taken him. Or maybe, he was the spiral now. I stood alone again, mask in hand, armor bonded, and the memory of a man who had once been an echo. Now, it was my turn, not to choose, but to become. There's no ceremony for the final trial. No horns, no drums, no chanting in that haunting insectile language. It starts with a door, a heavy slab of living metal that splits open with a sound like bone grinding on stone. And you walk through, alone. I did, and entered a jungle I hadn't seen before. Not the one near the wreck. Not the proving grounds. This place, it breathed. I mean that literally. The trees exhaled mist. The vines recoiled when touched. Every leaf shimmered with static. Like the air was charged with a storm waiting to burst. The final hunt had begun. But here's the twist. I wasn't told what to hunt. There were no targets, no coordinates, no assignments whispered into my ear. Just the jungle, just the spiral, and the whisper of my own pulse in my ears. That's the thing about the Yautja. The last trial isn't about skill. It's about intuition. Do you chase what you fear? Or wait for it to find you? Old Yautja wisdom. The prey that teaches you pain is the only one worth remembering. So I walked, and the jungle responded. I don't mean metaphorically. Something stalked me, but not like the others had before. Not cloaked hunters or trial creatures bred for showmanship. This was different. No clicks, no growls, no shimmering outlines. Just absence. Birdsong cut off. The wind dropped. Even the vines stopped writhing. Something had entered the spiral. And it wasn't invited. The trees parted ahead, and there it stood. Massive. Wrong. It looked vaguely xenomorphic, but stretched, lanky, hunched, but with human-like posture. It had 3 arms on each side, and a skull elongated beyond natural proportion. No eyes, no mouth, just teeth, lined around the jaw like a rotating saw blade. The spiral hated this thing. And it was mine. I didn't run, didn't cloak. I stepped forward. The mask fed me data, blood pressure, wind velocity, threat level, overwhelming, cool. The creature lunged. Faster than it looked. I dodged left, narrowly avoiding a claw that shattered a boulder behind me like it was meringue. Came up rolling and struck with my wrist blade. It scraped harmlessly off its chitin. Well, that's fair. It came again, this time slamming down both fists. The impact sent up a shockwave that threw me backward, my spine cracking against a stone trunk. Armor absorbed most of it. Most. The mask flashed a warning. Acidic vapor detected. It bled air. This thing wasn't natural. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just the final trial. It was a cleanse. A parasite. A mutation. Something the Yautja had either bred and lost control of, or worse. Encountered from the stars. They didn't want it hunted. They wanted it erased. By me. Why? Because I was still partially human. Unreadable, unpredictable, and expendable if it went sideways. Academic debate calls this the utilitarian expendability clause. Translation: send the rookie. I'd love to tell you I had a plan. I didn't, but the jungle did. Remember that seed the matriarch gave me? It was more than a symbol. It was a weapon. I drew it from my gauntlet, now fully bloomed into something like a throwing star. Pulsing, sizzling with latent charge. And the moment I raised it, the creature screamed. Not sound, vibration, like it recognized the spiral. Like it remembered what erased its kind before. I ran toward it. Yeah, toward. It struck. I ducked under its arms and plunged the seed into the joint between its neck and shoulder. Light erupted. No noise. Just light. The creature inverted. That's the only word for it. folded inside itself, collapsed like a dying star. Gone. I staggered back, breathing hard, armor sizzling, mask flickering, and then, silence. Real silence. The spiral had been reset. A drone appeared, silent and black, hovering above. It scanned me once, then dropped something. A helmet. Not mine. A true Yautja helm, polished, adorned, etched in silver spirals. My mark. I placed it on my head. And the jungle bowed. Okay, not literally, but the vines loosened. The trees shifted. The air lightened. And I knew, I was no longer the echo. I was the keeper of the spiral. Quirky fact. Just to ground us again, the pistol shrimp can snap its claw so fast. It creates a bubble hotter than the sun's surface. Small things can change the tide of entire ecosystems. And in this moment, I was the pistol shrimp. I walked back through the jungle, alone, but this time, the spiral walked with me. The jungle opened for me. Not physically. There were no grand partings of leaves or magical vines curling aside. But everything felt lighter, like I had passed an unseen test. And now the world tilted slightly to let me through. I returned to the pyramid of ascension as the stars shifted above. The twin moons had returned, full now, casting pale, shimmering light on the obsidian spires. The jungle that once hummed with suspicion now buzzed with something else. Recognition. I was no longer a trespasser. I was spiral marked. At the temple gates, 2 hunters waited. Each bowed their head slightly. Just enough to acknowledge. Not equal, not yet, but close. Inside, the matriarch stood atop the dais. She wasn't alone. The elders flanked her, each in full ceremonial armor. Their masks glinted like the edge of a blade under starlight. No words were spoken. Instead, a single object was brought forth. A tusk, carved with the entire spiral sequence. From birth to honor to death. It was heavy, real, more than symbolic. This was final marking. They handed it to me. And for a moment, I hesitated, not because I was afraid, those days had passed, but because I understood what this meant. There was no going back. This wasn't anthropology anymore. This wasn't observation. This was assimilation. Old Yautja wisdom. To carry the spiral is to forget your name. But not your truth. I pressed the tusk to my chest. It burned, not from heat, but memory. Visions flooded back. Kylo's eyes. Dr. Rios's final breath. The creature folding inward like regret. Earth, under surveillance. And me, not human anymore, not alien, just record. The tusk left a spiral burned into the armor, right over my heart. And when I looked up, the matriarch bowed. Not deeply, not theatrically, but enough. It was done. No cheers, no clapping, no dramatic music. Just a low, echoing pulse throughout the chamber, as if the planet itself acknowledged the shift in balance. The hunter beside me handed me one last item. A transmitter, coded to only one frequency, Earth. You may go, he said, in flat, mechanical English, but you are spiral now. If you speak, speak only truth. If you warn, warn with purpose. If you kill, he paused, kill clean. Academic minds would say I crossed an ethical boundary, immersed too far, became too close to the subject. But the subject, it had become me. I left that night, climbed the ridge of ashen jungle and sky, stood on the edge, transmitter in hand. The stars above were different now. Colder, wiser, and waiting. Quirky fact, one last gift before we go. When light from the most distant galaxies reaches us, we're seeing billions of years into the past. The universe is an echo chamber of forgotten things. And me, I was now an echo that remembered. I activated the transmitter. It blinked once, then again, and Earth answered, not in words, but in curiosity, just like always, just like prey. And that, friends, is the truth behind the spiral, the society behind the myth, the honor behind the hunt. What began with a crash in a jungle ended with me standing on the edge of 2 worlds. Neither fully mine, both permanently changed. The Yautja aren't monsters. Not really. They're memory in motion. A species ruled not by chaos, but by balance, razor-thin balance. Enforced through blood, trial, and ancient code. Every rite, every scar, every whisper in the trees has a purpose. And if you're lucky, or unlucky enough, to be marked by it, you'll never see the universe the same way again. They don't just take skulls. They take stories. And if you're hearing this, maybe that's what I've become. A story, a warning, a reflection. What I saw, what I lived through, it wasn't fiction. It wasn't folklore. It was a window, and I'm leaving it cracked open, just wide enough for the next echo. So before you go back to scrolling, or close this tab, or forget this ever happened, ask yourself, what would you do if the spiral chose you? Now, turn off the lights. Let the silence sit for a while. And remember, sometimes, the ones doing the hunting are just waiting for you to notice.